Schiff thought he could humiliate Senator Kennedy with one insult. Ignorant Southern puppet, Kennedy reached into his battered briefcase and pulled out 23 folders, each one labeled with a different scandal from Schiff's career. "Well, Congressman," Kennedy drawled, "my mama taught me that when someone calls you ignorant, you should educate them." He opened the first folder. "Class is in session and tuition is free." Stay with me because by folder number 7, Schiff's own lawyer would abandon him on live television. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room was packed beyond capacity. What was supposed to be a routine joint hearing on intelligence community reform had transformed into a gladiatorial arena. Word had spread through the Capitol that Schiff planned to destroy Senator John Kennedy, the Louisiana Republican, known for his folksy demeanor and colorful expressions. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Schiff arrived with an entourage, 3 lawyers, 5 staffers, and 2 boxes of meticulously organized documents. His Armani suit was pressed to perfection, his California tan glowing under the lights. He moved with the confidence of a prosecutor who'd never lost a case he'd rigged. Senator Kennedy arrived alone, carrying one battered leather briefcase that looked like it had survived Hurricane Katrina. His suit was decent but unremarkable, his white hair slightly mussed. To the casual observer, he looked like someone's grandfather who'd wandered into the wrong building. The liberal media filled the press section's smartphones, ready to capture what they expected to be the humiliation of another backward Southern Republican. CNN's Chiron was already prepared, Schiff School's Southern senator on intelligence matters. Schiff opened with characteristic arrogance, his voice dripping with coastal condescension. "Senator Kennedy," he began, emphasis on the title suggesting it was undeserved. "Your voting record shows consistent opposition to intelligence community reforms. You've called dedicated public servants deep state operatives. You've supported a president who attacked our institutions. Frankly, your backward Southern politics have no place in serious discussions about national security." Kennedy listened quietly, occasionally cleaning his glasses with a handkerchief that had seen better days. Schiff continued, growing bolder with each word. "Maybe if you spent less time coming up with folksy sayings and more time actually reading intelligence reports, assuming you can understand them, you'd realize how out of your depth you are." Several Democrats chuckled. The media typed furiously. "And that accent?" Schiff added with a smirk. "Perhaps you could speak a bit faster. Some of us have actual work to do today." Kennedy finally looked up, a small smile playing at his lips. He leaned into the microphone, his drawl even thicker than usual. "Well now, Congressman Schiff, I appreciate your concern about my speaking pace. I may sound like Foghorn Leghorn, but at least I don't lie like Pinocchio." The room stirred. Several people laughed. Schiff's face reddened slightly. "You see," Kennedy continued, "where I come from we have a saying, 'Don't start none won't be none.' But since you brought up my education, I suppose I should mention that I did manage to muddle through Vanderbilt University, the University of Virginia Law School, and what was that other place? Oh yes, Oxford University, as in England, as in Rhodes Scholar." The laughter stopped. Schiff blinked rapidly. Kennedy reached into his briefcase and pulled out a bound document. "In fact, I've been doing some reading myself. This here is your Harvard Law thesis, Congressman. Prosecutorial ethics in the modern justice system. Fascinating stuff. Page 47 is particularly interesting." He adjusted his glasses and began reading. "A prosecutor who manipulates evidence or misleads the court betrays not just his office, but the very foundation of justice itself. Your words, Congressman. Shall we discuss how well you've lived up to them?" Schiff's confident smirk vanished entirely. "Now, you mentioned I don't understand complex legal matters," Kennedy continued. "So let me see if I can struggle through this. You also challenged my knowledge of California law. Well, let's see. California Evidence Code Section 1040, subsection B, states that public entities have a privilege to refuse disclosure of official information if disclosure is against the public interest. You violated that section exactly 17 times during your Intelligence Committee tenure." He rattled off the dates and specific violations from memory, his drawl never wavering. But I'm just a simple country lawyer, Kennedy added with theatrical modesty. What would I know about the law codes of all 50 states that I've memorized for fun? The press section had gone silent. This wasn't the massacre they'd expected, at least not in the direction they'd anticipated. Schiff tried to recover. Memorizing statutes doesn't make you qualified to discuss intelligence matters. Speaking of intelligence, Kennedy interrupted, gently opening his briefcase again. I've brought some homework, 23 folders to be exact, each one documenting what my grandpappy would call shenanigans from your career. He pulled out folder after folder, arranging them neatly on the desk. Each one had a label clearly visible to the cameras: Russia hoax, whistleblower coordination, illegal leaks, China connections, Ed Buck scandal, and more. Now, Congressman Schiff, Kennedy said, his voice taking on a prosecutorial edge despite the maintained drawl, you called me ignorant, backwards, and embarrassing. My mama taught me that when someone insults you like that, they're usually describing themselves. So let's test that theory. Shall we? Schiff's team of lawyers began whispering urgently among themselves. This wasn't going according to plan. But first, Kennedy added, pulling out his phone, I want to show you something interesting. You see, while you were insulting my intelligence, the good folks back home in Louisiana were watching, and they have some thoughts. He showed his phone screen to the cameras. His Twitter mentions were exploding with support, while Schiff's were filling with questions about what was in those folders. Seems like those backward folks understand something you don't, Congressman. They can smell what my cousin Boudreaux calls a possum in the woodpile from a mile away. And, sir, with all due respect, you're stinking up the whole forest. The committee chairman, a Democrat who'd expected this to be a simple embarrassment of a Republican senator, shifted uncomfortably. Gentlemen, perhaps we should focus on the agenda. Oh, I'm happy to focus on intelligence reform, Kennedy said cheerfully, starting with reforming the intelligence of certain committee members who wouldn't recognize the truth if it bit them on their Harvard-educated posterior. Even some Democrats couldn't suppress their smiles at that one. So what'll it be, Congressman? Kennedy asked, gesturing to his stack of folders. You want to keep talking about how ignorant I am? Or would you like to discuss your career, because I've got all day, and unlike some folks, I tell the truth even when I'm talking slow? Schiff's face had gone from red to pale. His chief lawyer leaned over and whispered something urgent in his ear. Let's start with Russia, shall we? Kennedy suggested, reaching for the first folder. Because that's where your problems began. Well, actually, they began in law school when you apparently skipped the ethics classes, but Russia is where they became public. He opened the folder with the deliberate care of a man opening a Christmas present he'd been saving. This is going to be more fun than a crawfish boil in July, Kennedy muttered, just loud enough for the microphones to catch. The hunter had become the hunted, and the slow-talking Southern senator was about to show exactly why you should never judge a book by its accent. Now, Congressman Schiff. Kennedy began opening the first folder with theatrical deliberation. Let's talk about your famous quote, the one where you said you had more than circumstantial evidence of Russian collusion. That was quite a claim, like my uncle Beauregard claiming he caught a catfish the size of a John boat. He pulled out a meticulously organized timeline chart. The difference is Uncle Beauregard had a picture. You, sir, had nothing but hot air and a willing media. By my count, and I'm just a simple country lawyer who can count, you lied to the American people about Russian collusion exactly 237 times. I know because I counted each one, twice, had my staff verify it 3 times. Schiff straightened in his chair. I always maintained that we had evidence. Oh, that's interesting, Kennedy interrupted, reaching for a small digital recorder. Because I have here a recording from a closed session of your committee, March 17th, 2019. Would you like me to play it? Schiff's lawyers huddled closer. One whispered urgently, That's classified. Was classified, Kennedy corrected cheerfully. Declassified last month. Funny how truth has a way of seeing daylight eventually. He pressed play. Schiff's voice filled the room. We don't have direct evidence yet, but I'm confident we'll find it if we keep looking. Yet that very night, Kennedy continued, stopping the recording. You went on CNN and told Anderson Cooper you had smoking gun evidence. That's like saying you've got gumbo when all you have is an empty pot and wishful thinking. The press section was furiously taking notes, but their expressions had changed. This wasn't the story they'd come to cover. But wait, there's more, Kennedy said, channeling his best infomercial voice. Let me ask you something, Congressman. Did you know Dmitry Volkov? Schiff's face went from pale to gray. I don't recall. Let me refresh your memory, Kennedy offered helpfully. Harvard Law School class of 1985, your roommate for 2 years, son of a Russian diplomat. Interesting fellow, currently works for a Russian state energy company. You projected your own Russian connections onto President Trump like an IMAX theater projecting a movie. He pulled out a photo of young Schiff and Volkov at Harvard arms around each other's shoulders, smiling at the camera. In Louisiana, we call that psychological projection. It's like a thief thinking everyone else is stealing. Schiff tried to rally. That meeting with the committee was classified. You just admitted to what? Kennedy asked innocently. Playing a declassified recording. But speaking of classified information, didn't you discuss that same classified meeting on CNN that very night? Let me see here. He pulled out a tablet and played a CNN clip from the same date. There was Schiff telling Anderson Cooper details from the supposedly classified meeting. Your memory is shorter than a politician's promise at election time, Kennedy observed. Or maybe you just figured rules don't apply to you, like my Meemaw used to say, rules are for thee, not for me. Except she was describing hypocrites not endorsing the practice. The comparison between the Nunes memo and the Schiff memo was even more devastating. Kennedy laid out both documents side by side on the desk using a ruler to point at specific sections like a teacher with a particularly slow student. Now the Nunes memo said the FISA warrant was based on the unverified Steele dossier. You called that a lie. Turns out verified. Nunes said the FBI didn't tell the FISA court who paid for the dossier. You said that was false. Turns out true as gospel. Everything in the Nunes memo verified. Everything in your memo debunked like a Bigfoot sighting. He looked up at Schiff with exaggerated sympathy. You're batting dozen while calling yourself an all-star. That's like my cousin Thibodeau claiming he's a NASCAR driver because he once drove fast to the Piggly Wiggly. A Republican senator couldn't suppress a laugh. Even some Democrats were struggling to maintain their composure. But here's my favorite part. Kennedy continued, warming to his theme. You spent 3 years, claiming you had evidence. My Meemaw used to say the rooster that crows loudest laid the fewest eggs. You crowed about Russia from every rooftop in Washington, every TV studio in New York, every podcast in California. He paused for effect, then delivered the killing blow. But your nest is emptier than a politician's promises. You didn't have evidence. You had hopes, dreams, and a willing media. That's not investigation, Congressman. That's fiction writing, and not even good fiction. Stephen King writes better fiction, and his monsters are more believable than your evidence. Schiff's lead attorney stood up. Mr. Chairman, I object to the characterization. Sit down, counselor, Kennedy said gently. This isn't a court, and your client isn't under oath. Though given his relationship with the truth, that might not matter much anyway. He closed the Russia folder with a satisfied snap. You know what the real tragedy is, Congressman? While you were chasing phantoms and pursuing your Russia fantasies, real threats to America went uninvestigated. Real corruption went unpunished, all because you were too busy playing Captain Ahab to your white whale of Russian collusion. Kennedy leaned back in his chair, studying Schiff like an entomologist examining a particularly interesting specimen of bug. But don't worry, we're just getting started. Like my grandpappy used to say, when you're draining the swamp, you find the biggest gators at the bottom. And sir, we're about to go deep sea diving in your career. He reached for the next folder labeled Whistleblower Scandal in large, bold letters. Now this one here is particularly interesting, because this is where you went from being wrong to being corrupt. It's like the difference between stepping in a puddle and jumping in the swamp with both feet. Schiff was sweating now despite the air conditioning. His team of lawyers looked like they were reconsidering their life choices. "Shall we continue your education, Congressman?" Kennedy asked sweetly. "After all, you were worried about my ignorance. I'm just trying to clear things up. Consider this a free seminar in ethics. I know Harvard charged you a fortune, but apparently they offered refunds on that particular class. Now, let's talk about your little whistleblower friend." Kennedy began opening the second folder with the care of a surgeon preparing to operate. "You know, the one you definitely never met, never coordinated with, and certainly never coached. That whistleblower." He pulled out a detailed timeline that looked like something from a murder mystery board. August 12th, 2019, your staff meets with the whistleblower. August 12th, 2019, same exact day, whistleblower files complaint. Now, I'm not a betting man, but those odds are longer than my Aunt Gertrude's grocery list. Schiff shifted in his seat. There was no coordination. "Hold on now," Kennedy interrupted, pulling out his phone. "I'm going to do something that might seem a little unconventional. I'm going to text the whistleblower right now. Let's see. Hey, remember those meetings with Schiff's staff?" The hearing room went dead silent. Kennedy's phone buzzed almost immediately. "Well, would you look at that?" Kennedy said, showing the screen to the cameras. Response says, "Which time? Seems like your whistleblower friend has a different recollection than you do, Congressman." Schiff's face had gone from gray to green. His lawyers were frantically whispering. "But wait, it gets better," Kennedy announced, producing a photograph. "This here is from Chez Laurent in Georgetown. Fancy place, $200 steaks. And look who's having dinner together on August 5th, 1 week before the complaint was filed." The photo clearly showed Schiff dining with a younger man, both leaning in conspiratorially over their meals. You coached the witness, then acted more surprised than a raccoon in a garbage can with the lid slammed shut. That's like a fireman who starts fires just so he can put them out and play hero. Kennedy then pulled out a transcript handling it like evidence in a courtroom. But the real masterpiece was your parody of President Trump's phone call. Let me refresh everyone's memory. He played audio of Schiff's infamous parody, reading his dramatic interpretation of Trump's call that bore no resemblance to reality. "Now let's compare that to the actual transcript," Kennedy said, pulling out the real document. He read sections side by side, the contrast devastating. You lied on national television, made up quotes, created dialogue that never existed. In Louisiana, we call that fraud. In California, apparently you call it parody, like calling a bank robbery an unauthorized withdrawal. The press section was in overdrive now, cameras clicking, keyboards clacking. This wasn't the narrative they'd expected. But here's where it gets really interesting. Kennedy continued his drawl, becoming more pronounced as he warmed to his subject. You hid 17 witness testimonies that contradicted your narrative. 17. That's more hidden than my Uncle Claude's moonshine stash. He began reading excerpts from the hidden testimonies, each one destroying Schiff's carefully constructed narrative. Ambassador Volker, I saw no evidence of collusion. Tim Morrison, I saw nothing illegal in the call. Kurt Volker, there was no quid pro quo. You hid evidence like a squirrel hides nuts, except squirrels do it for survival. You did it for political gain. Kennedy then produced a model of the Capitol building and placed it on the desk with theatrical flair. And let's talk about your basement bunker. You held secret hearings in the basement like some sort of Batman villain. Except Batman fights for justice. You're fighting due process. He pointed to the basement with a pointer he'd pulled from somewhere. Republicans denied entry. Witnesses coached in secret. Selective leaks to friendly media. You turned the United States Capitol into your personal star chamber. King George would have been proud. The Founding Fathers. They're spinning in their graves fast enough to power the eastern seaboard. A young Republican congressman couldn't contain himself. That's exactly what happened. They locked us out. Order, the chairman said weakly, but his heart wasn't in it. The damage was being done. Kennedy pulled out one more document from the whistleblower folder. Here's my favorite part. This is an email from your staff to the whistleblower. Subject line, suggested revisions to your complaint. You edited his homework like a teacher with a red pen. Then you had the audacity to act surprised when the homework you helped write showed up on your desk. He shook his head sadly. That's like being shocked to find gambling in a casino. My departed Meemaw had a saying, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. You put lipstick mascara and a whole beauty salon treatment on this pig of a scandal, but it's still oinked. Schiff attempted one last defense. The president was threatening national security. The only threat to national security, Kennedy interrupted, was a congressman who thinks the rules don't apply to him. You weaponized the Intelligence Committee, turned oversight into overthrow, and made a mockery of due process. He closed the whistleblower folder with finality. You know what really gets me? You're a former prosecutor. You know better. It's like a doctor who took the Hippocratic Oath deciding to poison patients. You didn't just betray your office. You betrayed your training, your ethics, and most importantly, you betrayed the American people who trusted you to be fair. Kennedy pulled out a handkerchief and cleaned his glasses again, taking his time. But I'm just a simple country lawyer. What do I know about complex things like not lying to America and following the law? Those must be advanced concepts they don't teach in the backwoods of Louisiana. The sarcasm was thick enough to cut with a knife. Ready for folder number 3, Congressman? Or do you need a recess to come up with new excuses? Because I've got to tell you the ones you're using now are weaker than gas station coffee. Kennedy reached for the next folder, handling it with exaggerated care as if it contained something toxic, which in a way it did. Now this folder here requires a strong stomach, he said, his Louisiana drawl thick with disgust. It's about your donor, Ed Buck, and some other unsavory characters from your California cesspool. Fair warning to folks with weak constitutions. He opened it slowly, revealing photographs that made several people in the gallery gasp. Ed Buck, major donor to your campaigns, gave you over $500,000 over the years, also had a habit of having young men die in his apartment. 2 dead bodies, both young black men, both died of drug overdoses in his home, and you kept taking his money. Kennedy's voice had lost all traces of humor. This wasn't political gamesmanship anymore. Gemmell Moore, 26 years old, found dead in Buck's apartment. Timothy Dean, 55 years old, also found dead in Buck's apartment, and you knew. The whole Democratic establishment in California knew, but the money was good, wasn't it, Congressman? He clicked a remote and a video began playing on the hearing room screens. A middle-aged black woman appeared, tears streaming down her face. My name is Letitia Nixon, the woman said. My son Gemmell was killed by Ed Buck. Adam Schiff knew Ed Buck was dangerous. Everyone in California politics knew, but they kept taking his money. They kept protecting him. My son is dead because politicians like Adam Schiff cared more about campaign donations than black lives. The room was absolutely silent. Even Schiff's lawyers had stopped their whispering. Did those young men's lives matter less than Ed Buck's money, Congressman? Kennedy asked quietly. Because that's what it looks like from where I'm sitting. Schiff finally found his voice. I returned those donations as soon as... Did you now? Kennedy interrupted, pulling out Federal Election Commission records. Because according to these official filings, you never returned a dime. Not 1 red cent, even after the first death, even after the second death. The money stayed in your campaign accounts. He looked up at Schiff with undisguised contempt. Your pants are on fire, Congressman. And that's not a Louisiana saying. That's just a fact. Kennedy pulled out more documents, each one seemingly worse than the last. But Ed Buck wasn't your only questionable donor. Let's talk about the Standard Hotel. You remember the Standard Hotel, don't you? Interesting things happened there. Mysterious things. Dead things. Schiff's face had gone from green to white. What exactly happened at that hotel, Congressman? Why did certain incidents get covered up? Why did investigations get shut down? And why did the hotel's political donations to you spike right after each incident? The questions hung in the air like an accusation. In Louisiana, we judge a man by the company he keeps, Kennedy continued. You kept company with predators, degenerates, and worse, and they all had one thing in common. They gave you money and you gave them protection. He pulled out a map of Los Angeles covered in red dots. Each red dot is a donor of yours who's been convicted of, charged with, or credibly accused of serious crimes. There are 47 dots on this map. You're like a magnet for moral bankruptcy. A voice from the gallery shouted, "What about the victims?" Kennedy nodded gravely. That's the right question. What about the victims? What about the young men who died while politicians looked the other way? What about the families destroyed while campaign coffers filled? He turned back to Schiff. You represent one of the wealthiest districts in America, yet it has one of the worst homeless problems. Skid Row is in your backyard, crime is soaring, quality of life is plummeting. But you're in Washington getting rich, taking money from criminals and lecturing the rest of us about ethics. Kennedy pulled out crime statistics for Schiff's district. Violent crime up 42%, property crime up 67%, homeless population increased by 3,000%, but your net worth increased by 400%. Seems like you're the only thing thriving in your district. He shook his head sadly. You're like a captain who abandoned his ship but kept collecting captain's pay. Except the ship is on fire, taking on water, and the passengers are drowning. Schiff tried one more defense. These are baseless accusations. Baseless. Kennedy's voice rose for the first time. Tell that to Gemmill Moore's mother. Tell that to Timothy Dean's family. Tell that to the victims of crimes committed by your protected donors. He slammed his hand on the desk, making everyone jump. You know what? Let me ask you something directly, Congressman. And remember, lying to Congress is a federal crime. Did you or did you not know about Ed Buck's activities before the deaths occurred? Schiff's lawyers practically tackled him to whisper urgently in his ear. After a long consultation, Schiff spoke carefully. I plead the Fifth Amendment. The hearing room erupted. Even Democrats looked shocked. You're pleading the Fifth about your knowledge of criminal activities by your donors? Kennedy asked incredulously. Well, that's more honest than you've been all day. At least now we know where you stand, or where you hide more accurately. He closed the California cesspool folder with disgust. You know what the saddest part is? Those young men who died, they were somebody's sons, somebody's brothers. They had dreams, hopes, families. But to you and Ed Buck, they were disposable. Their lives were worth less than campaign contributions. Kennedy took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes tiredly. My mama taught me not to speak ill of folks, but she also taught me to speak the truth. And the truth is, Congressman Schiff, you've got blood on your hands. Maybe not legally, that's for others to determine, but morally, ethically, you're as guilty as sin on Sunday. He looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. This is what corruption looks like, folks. It's not just about money. It's about the human cost. It's about choosing donors over decency politics, over people power, over principles. Kennedy reached for the next folder. Speaking of choosing money over a country, let's talk about your Chinese connections. Because if you thought Ed Buck was bad, wait until you see who else has been funding your career. Now, before we dive into this folder, Kennedy began adjusting his glasses with theatrical precision. I need to establish something. You and Congressman Eric Swalwell, both California Democrats, both on the Intelligence Committee, y'all are like peas in a pod, except Eric got honeypotted by a Chinese spy and you, well, you just got money-potted. He opened the folder marked Chinese Connections with the reverence of someone handling historical documents. Let's start with your donor list. Amazing how many of your contributors have ties to the Chinese Communist Party. It's like a who's who of Beijing's influence operations. Kennedy pulled out a complex financial chart that looked like a spider web. James Cheng donated $50,000 to your campaigns, also happens to be on the board of 3 companies directly owned by the Chinese government. Linda Wu, $75,000 in donations. Her husband runs the U.S. branch of China Construction Bank. Should I continue? Schiff's attorneys were furiously taking notes, trying to keep up. But here's where it gets really interesting, Kennedy said, leaning forward conspiratorially. Then, without warning, he spoke in perfect Mandarin Chinese. 你能理解我说的话吗？国会议员. Can you understand what I'm saying? Congressman. The room went dead silent. Everyone stared at Schiff, who had involuntarily started to respond in Mandarin before catching himself. His mouth was half open, frozen in horror at his mistake. Interesting language skills you have there, Congressman, Kennedy observed, switching back to English with his drawl intact. Where exactly did you learn Mandarin, and why did you understand my question about your Chinese handlers? The press section exploded with activity. This was the moment that would lead every news broadcast. But wait, it gets better, Kennedy announced, pulling out his phone. Let's see what Chinese state media is saying right now. Oh, would you look at that article published in the People's Daily, published 47 minutes ago, during this hearing. He read from his phone, Congressman Schiff defends China's interests against racist attacks. They're watching and cheering you on in real time. You're their MVP, most valuable puppet. Kennedy then produced bank records that painted a damning picture. Every time you voted against sanctions on China, deposit. Every time you killed legislation critical of Beijing, deposit. Every time you defended Chinese trade practices, deposit. You're more reliable than a Swiss watch if Swiss watches were owned by the Chinese Communist Party. He displayed a timeline showing Schiff's votes and corresponding bank deposits. March 2019, vote against Uyghur sanctions bill. March 20th, $25,000 deposited in your wife's consulting firm. June 2019, kill Taiwan defense legislation in committee. June 15th, $40,000 in speaking fees from a Chinese-American organization funded by Beijing. Those are coincidences, Schiff protested weakly. Coincidences. Kennedy laughed. Son, if these are coincidences, then I'm the emperor of China. The only thing coincidental here is how every pro-China vote coincidentally makes you richer. He pulled out intelligence assessments that had been declassified. According to FBI counterintelligence, Chinese state media has mentioned you favorably 847 times in the last 5 years. They've mentioned me exactly 0 times. Wonder why that is. Could it be because I don't vote the way Beijing wants? Kennedy then delivered another surprise. You know who else is interesting? Your former colleague, Senator Dianne Feinstein. Her driver for 20 years was a Chinese spy. You both knew. You both protected each other. Like a mutual destruction pact, except the destruction was of American interests. He showed classified briefing logs. January 2018, FBI briefs you on Chinese influence operations in Congress. February 2018, you vote against every China-related security measure. March 2018, you publicly call concerns about China xenophobic. That's not oversight, that's overlook. The pattern was undeniable and damaging. Every anti-China bill that came through your committee, killed. Every pro-China bill, fast-tracked. You're more consistent than grits at a Southern breakfast, consistently serving Beijing's interests. Kennedy pulled out one more document. This is testimony from a Chinese defector, former intelligence officer. He says, and I quote, Schiff was considered a reliable asset for shaping American policy in China's favor, not recruited but useful nonetheless. Even Chinese intelligence thinks you're their boy. That's outrageous, Schiff started. You know what's outrageous, Kennedy interrupted. Selling out American workers to China, selling out American technology to China, selling out American security to China, all while getting rich from Chinese-connected money. He leaned back in his chair, studying Schiff like a specimen. In Louisiana, we have a saying, when you lie down with dogs, you get up with fleas. You've been lying down with the Chinese Communist Party, and sir, you're infested. Kennedy pulled out his final piece of evidence from the China folder. Here's the most damning part. After classified briefings on Chinese military threats, your investment portfolio shows purchases of Chinese stocks. You literally bet against America and for China. That's not just wrong. That's not just corrupt. That's borderline treasonous. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Now, I'm not saying you're a Chinese agent, Kennedy clarified. I'm saying you vote like one, profit like one, and defend Beijing like one. If it walks like a Peking duck and quacks like a Peking duck. He closed the China folder with finality. You know what really burns my grits? American factories closed because of China. American jobs lost because of China. American technology stolen by China. And through it all, Adam Schiff got richer while American workers got poorer. Kennedy's voice rose with genuine anger. You sold out the working families of America for Chinese cash. You're supposed to represent California, not Beijing. But I guess it's hard to tell the difference when you're cashing checks from both. He reached for the next folder labeled Media Manipulation. Speaking of selling out, let's talk about how you've corrupted the free press. Because a congressman who lies is bad enough. A congressman who gets the media to spread his lies, that's a whole different level of swamp creature. You know, Kennedy began settling back into his storytelling mode. My Uncle Boudreaux had an old boat that leaked something terrible. No matter how much we patched it, water kept coming in. That boat was more watertight than your office when it comes to leaking classified information. He opened the media folder and pulled out a stack of papers that must have been 6 inches thick. By my count, and I had 3 separate analysts verify this, your office was the source of 438 unauthorized leaks to the media. 438. That's more leaks than my Uncle Bobby's fishing boat, and that thing sank in Lake Pontchartrain. Kennedy began laying out the evidence methodically like a prosecutor building a case. But these weren't just any leaks. These were specifically timed, carefully orchestrated, designed to maximum political damage. You turned intelligence into entertainment, classification into clickbait. Suddenly, Kennedy's phone buzzed. He looked at it and his eyes widened with what could only be described as theatrical delight. Well, speak of the devil. Look at this, folks. He held up his phone to the cameras. Text message just came in from a CNN anchor. Let me read this. What's my opinion supposed to be today, Adam? The hearing room erupted. Schiff lunged for his own phone, frantically typing. Oh, you trying to warn them? Kennedy asked innocently. Too late. See, that wasn't really from CNN. That was from my staff using a spoofed number. But your reaction just confirmed you regularly coordinate talking points. Thanks for that. Schiff's face went from pale to purple. He'd been played like a fiddle. But we do have real evidence of media coordination. Kennedy continued producing actual screenshots. Like this hot mic moment from your appearance on MSNBC. He played the audio, Schiff's voice thinking he was off air. Make sure Jake gets the 3 talking points. Tapper needs to hit them hard tonight. So you're not just leaking to the media, Kennedy observed. You're directing them like a conductor with an orchestra, except the music you're making is the sound of journalism dying. Kennedy pulled out financial records showing a different kind of corruption. But it's not just about controlling the narrative, it's about profit. Speaking fees from media companies, $1.2 million over 5 years. Paid contributor contracts, another $800,000. Book deals with publishers owned by media conglomerates, $3 million. He shook his head in mock admiration. You turned intelligence work into a profit center. P.T. Barnum would be proud, except he was honest about being in the circus business. The evidence of fake news manufacturing was even more damaging. Kennedy produced side-by-side comparisons of original documents versus what Schiff presented to the media. Original email says meeting. You changed it to secret meeting. Original says discussion. You changed it to conspiracy. You edit evidence like a Hollywood script doctor, except movies are labeled fiction. Kennedy pulled out a thick binder labeled doctored evidence. 127 instances of altered documents, 89 cases of selectively edited transcripts, 234 misleading characterizations. You don't spin the truth, you put it in a blender and hit puree. He looked up at the press section, making eye contact with as many journalists as possible. And y'all in the media, some of you are victims, some of you are accomplices, but you all got played by a congressman who views truth as optional and facts as flexible. Kennedy then produced what might have been his most effective prop yet, a dictionary. I brought this to help Congressman Schiff. See, there's a word in here, journalism. Definition, the activity of gathering, assessing, creating, and presenting news and information. Nowhere does it say taking dictation from Adam Schiff. The press section was notably quieter now, many journalists looking uncomfortable. But here's the real kicker, Kennedy continued, returning to the evidence. We tracked the timeline of your leaks against market movements. Every time you leaked market-sensitive information, certain people made millions in trades. Want to guess who those people were connected to? He didn't wait for an answer. Your donors, your allies, your financial network. You didn't just leak for political gain, you leaked for profit. That's not just unethical, that's criminal. Kennedy pulled out one final piece of evidence from the media folder, a compilation video of Schiff making contradictory statements to different media outlets, sometimes on the same day. To CNN, you say one thing, to MSNBC another, to Fox, bias, when you rarely appear something completely different. You're like a chameleon, except chameleons change color for survival. You do it for ratings and profit. The video was devastating, showing Schiff contradicting himself dozens of times. You know what we call someone who tells different stories to different people in Louisiana? Kennedy asked. A liar. But I guess in California you call it media strategy. He closed the media folder with disgust. The First Amendment guarantees a free press because democracy needs truth. You've turned the press into your personal propaganda machine. That's not just corruption of Congress, that's corruption of democracy itself. Kennedy took off his glasses and cleaned them again, a gesture that had become his signature move during the hearing. Thomas Jefferson said, "Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter." But Jefferson assumed newspapers would tell the truth, not take dictation from Adam Schiff. He reached for the next folder labeled Impeachment Coup. Speaking of undermining democracy, let's talk about your impeachment circus. Because if manipulating the media was bad, what you did to the Constitution was worse. It's like the difference between pickpocketing and armed robbery, both wrong, but one's a whole lot worse. Kennedy held up the folder marked Impeachment Q and shook his head with theatrical sorrow. You know, when I was a boy in Louisiana, we'd sometimes play hide and seek in my grandpappy's barn. But even as children, we knew you couldn't just make up new rules in the middle of the game. Apparently, that's a lesson they don't teach at Harvard Law. He pulled out a detailed floor plan of the Capitol building and placed it on the desk with the reverence of a museum curator handling a precious artifact. This here is the Capitol basement, the Schiff, a place for classified briefings, not kangaroo courts. But you turned it into your personal star chamber, like a Batman villain, except Batman villains usually have better plans. Kennedy pointed to specific rooms with a laser pointer he'd produced from somewhere. Behind these closed doors, you held your secret trials. Republicans locked out, witnesses coached in private, selective leaks to friendly media. Due process died in that basement, murdered by a congressman who forgot his oath to the Constitution. A Republican congressman from Ohio couldn't contain himself. I was locked out of those hearings. My constituents were denied representation. Order, the chairman said weakly, but Kennedy was already moving on. But let's talk about witness coaching. Kennedy continued, pulling out a tablet. I've got something special here, a video testimony that came in just this morning from one of your star witnesses. He pressed play. A middle-aged man appeared on screen looking uncomfortable but determined. My name is William Taylor. I testified in the impeachment hearings. I need to clear my conscience. Congressman Schiff's staff coached me extensively. They told me what to say, how to say it, and what to avoid. When I expressed concerns about the truth, they said the truth was less important than the narrative. I was threatened with career destruction if I didn't comply. The hearing room exploded. Even Democrats looked shocked. Schiff's lawyers were in full panic mode. That's been edited, Schiff protested desperately. Has it now? Kennedy asked mildly. Well, good news. Mr. Taylor is willing to testify under oath, today, in public. unlike your basement trials. Kennedy then did something unexpected. He pulled out a pocket constitution and held it up. Pop quiz, Congressman Schiff. Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution. What does it say about impeachment? Don't Google it, though I know that's your first instinct for finding facts. Schiff glared but began to recite, "The President, Vice President, and all civil officers shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery." "Stop right there," Kennedy interrupted. "Treason, bribery, high crimes and misdemeanors. Now show me where it says hurt feelings or mean tweets or Adam Schiff doesn't like you." Laughter rippled through the gallery. "You see," Kennedy continued, "you didn't just break procedural rules, you violated every precedent in American history. Let me list them." He pulled out a prepared list and began reading, "Precedent. The accused gets to confront witnesses. You broke it. Precedent minority party gets equal subpoena power. You broke it. Precedent open hearings except for classified material. You broke it. Precedent due process rights. You broke it. Precedent presumption of innocence. You definitely broke it. You made up rules like a child playing Calvin ball, except Calvin was fictional and funny. You're real and dangerous." Kennedy then produced comparison charts showing every previous impeachment process versus Schiff's version. Andrew Johnson's impeachment, more due process than yours. Nixon's near impeachment, more fair than yours. Clinton's impeachment, a model of procedural justice compared to yours. You know you've gone too far when Bill Clinton's impeachment looks like a fair trial in comparison. He pulled out transcripts from the basement hearings that had been declassified. "But here's what really gets me. You claim to be defending democracy while acting like a tin pot dictator. Stalin would have been proud of your show trials. At least he was honest about being a tyrant." A voice from the gallery called out, "What about the Constitution?" Kennedy nodded approvingly. "Exactly the right question. What about the Constitution? Congressman Schiff swore an oath to defend it. Instead, he used it as toilet paper in his basement bathroom court." He turned back to Schiff with genuine anger now. "You know what the worst part is? Real crimes go uninvestigated while you chase phantoms. Real corruption goes unpunished while you conduct show trials. Real threats to America go unaddressed while you play partisan games." Kennedy pulled out one final document from the impeachment folder. This is a letter from Alexander Hamilton, Federalist 65. He warned about impeachment being abused for partisan purposes. He said, and I quote, "There will always be the greatest danger that the decision will be regulated more by the comparative strength of parties than by the real demonstrations of innocence or guilt." He looked up at Schiff. "Hamilton saw you coming 230 years ago. He warned us about politicians like you, and we didn't listen." Kennedy closed the impeachment folder with finality. "You turned a constitutional tool into a political weapon. You turned due process into don't process. You turned the people's house into your personal playhouse." He shook his head sadly. "My Meemaw used to say power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. You had absolute power in that basement, and you proved Meemaw right." Kennedy then stood up, something he hadn't done during the entire hearing. "You know what, I need to say something directly to the American people." He turned to face the cameras. "What you witnessed wasn't impeachment. It was a coup attempt dressed up in constitutional clothing. It was a partisan hit job masquerading as principled oversight. It was everything the founders feared when they gave Congress impeachment power." He sat back down and looked at Schiff, who had shrunk into his chair. "But the good news is truth has a way of surfacing. Like cream and milk, it rises to the top. And today the truth about your impeachment sham is finally seeing daylight." Kennedy reached for the final folder. "One more to go, Congressman. The grand finale, the piece de resistance, or as we say in Louisiana, the last dance at the Fez Doudou." The hearing room had transformed over the past 2 hours. What began as a packed arena of confident Democrats and smug media had become a somber courtroom where truth was systematically destroying lies. Schiff sat slumped in his chair, his expensive suit wrinkled with sweat, his hands visibly trembling. His team of lawyers had shrunk from 5 to 2. the others having quietly excused themselves during the last break. Kennedy opened the final folder with the careful precision of a surgeon preparing for the last cut. You know, Congressman Schiff, we've covered a lot of ground today. Russia lies, whistleblower coaching donor scandals, Chinese money media manipulation, impeachment games. That's quite a career you've built, like a house of cards. Impressive to look at, but one breath of truth and it all falls down. He pulled out a document that made Schiff's remaining lawyers exchange panicked glances. This here is interesting. It's your personal financial disclosure from 2015. Net worth approximately $500,000. Not bad for a public servant. Now here's your 2023 disclosure. Net worth approximately $4.5 million. That's an 800% increase. Either you're the world's greatest investor or public service pays better than we thought. Kennedy laid out year-by-year financial records, creating a damning timeline of enrichment. Every scandal we've discussed today made you richer. Every lie you told paid dividends. Every betrayal of public trust came with a bonus. You're like a corruption capitalist. You found a way to monetize malfeasance. Just then, something unexpected happened. Schiff's chief counsel stood up abruptly. Mr. Chairman, I need to state for the record that I can no longer represent Mr. Schiff in this matter. Ethical obligations prevent me from continuing. The lawyer gathered his papers and walked out, leaving Schiff visibly stunned. On live television, his own attorney had abandoned him. Well, Kennedy drawled, when the rats start leaving the ship, you know it's sinking. Though comparing your lawyer to a rat might be unfair to rats. They show loyalty. The remaining lawyer whispered urgently in Schiff's ear, but Schiff pushed him away, his composure finally cracking completely. This is a setup, Schiff shouted, his voice cracking. This is Trump's revenge. This is consequences, Kennedy interrupted calmly. Something you've avoided your whole career. But like my grandpappy used to say, the chickens always come home to roost. And Congressman, your whole farm just showed up. A Democratic congresswoman from California stood up unexpectedly. I can't sit here silently anymore, she said, her voice shaking. I'm from California. I've watched Adam Schiff operate for years. Director Kennedy is right. We've enabled this corruption through our silence. I can't be complicit anymore. The defection from his own party seemed to break something in Schiff. His hands were shaking so badly he knocked over his water glass. But we're not quite done, Kennedy continued, pulling out one final set of documents. These are criminal referrals I'll be submitting to the Department of Justice immediately following this hearing. Let me read the charges. He put on his reading glasses with theatrical precision. Perjury, 17 counts. Every time you lied to Congress under oath. Leaking classified information, 23 counts, each one documented. Obstruction of justice, 11 counts. Hiding evidence, witness tampering. RICO violations, 7 counts. Running a criminal enterprise from your office, wire fraud, 9 counts. Those Chinese wire transfers. Campaign finance violations, 31 counts. Ed Buck was just the beginning. The list went on, each charge backed by evidence presented during the hearing. That's 98 federal charges, Congressman. In Louisiana, we'd say you're in more trouble than a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Kennedy stood up again, this time gathering all his folders. You know what the saddest part is? You had potential. Harvard education law degree, elected to Congress. You could have served honorably. Instead, you chose lies over truth, power over principle, profit over people. He looked directly at Schiff with what could only be described as pity. My mama taught me to end with something positive, so here it is. You've provided a perfect example of how not to serve in public office. Future generations will study your career as a cautionary tale. You'll be remembered, just not the way you hoped. Kennedy then delivered his final blow with devastating Southern politeness. Bless your heart, Congressman Schiff. And when you're sitting in federal prison, and you will be, maybe you'll have time to read that ethics thesis you wrote at Harvard, the one about prosecutorial integrity. Consider it remedial education. The hearing room was dead silent. Schiff sat destroyed, his career in ruins, his crimes exposed, his allies fled. But Kennedy wasn't quite finished. Mr. Chairman, Kennedy said formally, I move that this committee recommend immediate criminal investigation of Congressman Adam Schiff, immediate revocation of his security clearances, and immediate ethics investigation into his conduct. All in favor? Every Republican hand shot up. After a moment, 3 Democratic hands joined them, then 5, then 7. Even members of his own party couldn't defend the indefensible anymore. Motion carries, the chairman announced somberly. As the gavel came down, Schiff tried to stand, but his legs gave out. He had to be helped from his chair by his remaining attorney. The man who'd entered the hearing room with supreme confidence was leaving as a broken shell. One more thing, Kennedy called out as Schiff was being led away. That accent you mocked, that backward Southern way of talking, it just ended your career. Guess slow and steady really does win the race. He packed up his briefcase, the same battered case he'd arrived with, and prepared to leave. But before he did, he turned to the cameras one last time. To the American people watching, this is what accountability looks like. This is what happens when truth confronts lies. This is what justice means, not partisan games, not political theater, but actual consequences for corruption. He smiled, his Louisiana charm returning. And to my constituents back home, thank you for sending this simple country lawyer to Washington. Sometimes it takes someone from the outside to clean up the inside. Today was a good day for truth. As Kennedy walked out, the gallery erupted in applause. Not partisan cheering, but the genuine appreciation of Americans who'd watched corruption finally face consequences. The last image on the cameras was Schiff being helped into a car. His career over his crimes exposed, his empire collapsed. The smooth-talking California congressman had been destroyed by a slow-talking Louisiana senator who proved that wisdom beats cleverness, truth beats lies, and authentic service beats corruption every single time. 3 months after the hearing that changed American politics, the consequences continued to ripple through Washington and beyond. Adam Schiff had been arrested 2 weeks after the hearing on 47 federal charges. The additional evidence that emerged during the investigation was even worse than what Kennedy had presented. Chinese bank accounts, additional dead bodies connected to his donors, and a web of corruption that reached into every corner of California politics. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. Schiff was convicted on all major counts and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. His assets were seized, his properties sold to pay restitution to victims, his political legacy destroyed forever. But the impact went far beyond one corrupt congressman. 19 members of Congress were indicted in the leak investigation. Major media figures were fired for corruption. New laws were passed requiring disclosure of all communications between Congress and media. Security clearance reforms prevented future abuses. The basement SIF was permanently closed to impeachment hearings. California held emergency reforms, cleaning out the corruption that had festered for decades. Ed Buck's victims finally got justice. The Chinese influence network was exposed and dismantled. American democracy grew stronger through the painful process of accountability. Senator John Kennedy returned to Louisiana, where he was greeted as a hero, but true to his nature, he deflected praise with characteristic humility. I just did my job, he told the crowd at the Baton Rouge airport. Any prosecutor worth his salt could have done the same with that evidence. The truth did all the heavy lifting. I just pointed it in the right direction. His simple country lawyer act had been revealed as brilliant strategy. Behind the folksy sayings and slow drawl was one of the sharpest legal minds in America. But Kennedy never dropped the persona. It was part of who he was, and it had served justice well. In interviews afterward, Kennedy reflected on the broader meaning of the confrontation. You know, folks ask me if I planned all that. The truth is, I just brought the evidence and let it speak for itself. Schiff thought he was smarter than everyone else. But like my Meemaw used to say, pride goeth before a fall, and Lord did he fall hard. The Kennedy-Schiff hearing became required viewing in law schools, political science classes, and ethics courses. It showed how one prepared person with truth on their side could defeat an entire corrupt system. Media coverage changed dramatically. The cozy relationship between politicians and journalists was exposed and severed. Real journalism began to return as reporters remembered their duty was to truth, not to Adam Schiff's talking points. In federal prison, Schiff spent his days in the law library, reportedly reading his old Harvard thesis on prosecutorial ethics. Guards reported he would sometimes be found crying, whether from remorse or self-pity, no one could say. The other inmates had a name for him, Pinocchio. Even in prison, his reputation as a liar followed him. He was assigned to the kitchen where he served food to other inmates, a far cry from the $200 steaks at Chez Laurent with whistleblowers and Chinese donors. Meanwhile, Kennedy's influence grew. His exposure of Schiff led to broader investigations of congressional corruption. The Kennedy Standard became shorthand for thorough evidence-based accountability. Young prosecutors studied his methodical destruction of Schiff as a masterclass in legal combat. But perhaps the most important change was in the American people's expectations. They'd seen what real accountability looked like. They'd watched corruption face consequences. They'd learned that sometimes a drawl and folksy sayings could hide a brilliant mind dedicated to justice. In Louisiana, children learned about the hearing in school. Teachers used it to illustrate important lessons: truth matters, evidence matters, character matters. And never ever underestimate someone just because they talk slow. Kennedy's mama, interviewed by a local paper, summed it up best. "I always taught John that manners matter, but so does backbone. He showed both that day, polite as Sunday dinner, but tough as an alligator when it counted. That's the Louisiana way." The phrase "bless your heart" took on new meaning in political circles. After Kennedy's devastating use of it, it became synonymous with polite destruction, a warning that someone was about to be demolished with Southern charm. Years later, political historians would mark the Kennedy-Schiff hearing as a turning point, the moment when performative politics met authentic accountability, when corruption finally faced consequences, when a simple country lawyer reminded America that truth presented clearly and backed by evidence was still the most powerful force in democracy. And in Louisiana, they still tell the story of the senator who talked slow but thought fast, who brought folders instead of rhetoric, who used folksy wisdom to deliver sophisticated justice. The senator who proved that sometimes the good guys do win. They just do it with a drawl and a "bless your heart." As Kennedy himself said in his final interview on the matter, "People keep asking me for the secret to taking down Schiff. There wasn't any secret, just truth evidence and a willingness to use both. Oh, and it helps if your opponent is dumber than a box of rocks and twice as corrupt. But mostly it was about remembering that serving the people means actually serving them, not yourself." He paused, then added with a grin, "Plus, it doesn't hurt to let folks underestimate you. Nothing quite as satisfying as watching someone realize the ignorant Southerner just ate their lunch dinner and next week's groceries, too." The last word belonged to Kennedy's uncle Beauregard, interviewed at his bait shop in Zachary, Louisiana. "Always knew that boy was sharp. Caught him reading Black's Law Dictionary when he was 12, pretending it was a comic book so the other kids wouldn't think he was showing off. He played dumb so well sometimes even I forgot he was playing. That Schiff fellow found out the hard way. You can't beat authentic with artificial, and you sure as heck can't beat truth with lies. Not when John Kennedy's holding the folders." Justice served with a side of Southern wisdom and a generous helping of "bless your heart" had never tasted so sweet.